So, I've talked with many of the Democratic candidates for president, as you might guess. I've answered their questions about everything from digital outreach to investments in the early states. And I've ended every conversation by saying to each one, let me tell you what I think the biggest obstacle might very well turn out to be, and that is this. You can run the best campaign, you can have the best plans, you can get the nomination, you can win the popular vote, and you can lose the Electoral College and therefore the election for these 4 reasons. Number 1, voter suppression. We saw what happened in Georgia, where Stacey Abrams should be governor of that state. Registered voters were kept off the rolls. Their registrations just piled up in some back office with no intention to ever enroll them so that they could actually vote. We also saw what happened in 2016. Experts estimate that anywhere from 27,000 to 200,000 Wisconsin citizen voters, predominantly in Milwaukee, were turned away from the polls. That's a lot of potential voters. They showed up, but maybe they didn't have the correct form of identification. Maybe the name on their driver's license included a middle name or an initial that wasn't on their voter registration. But officials made every excuse in the book to prevent certain people from voting in that election. Voter purging is another form of voter suppression. Between 2012, when President Obama ran, and 2016, when I ran, 12 million voters were purged from the rolls. They were purged in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Ohio, in Florida, in other places, often using a system devised and paid for by Robert Mercer. And when you have a Republican-controlled state government, as we did in those states back in 2016, it's practically impossible. In fact, I'll say it is impossible to fight back, let alone to stop that very deliberate form of suppression. Number 2, hacking. I tell every candidate, if you have not had your personal and campaign emails hacked, they will be. So will the emails of people working for you. Your information will be stolen and then weaponized against you in the most pernicious ways. Remember Pizzagate? WikiLeaks? Cybersecurity is an essential component of protecting our democracy, but it's very difficult for campaigns on their own to be able to do that. You need a national commitment to cybersecurity. And as many cyber experts have already told us, that just doesn't exist. And there is no real effort being made to install such a system that will protect voters everywhere. Now, Randy referenced Kathleen Hall Jamieson, one of our most distinguished scholars of democracy and elections. And in her book, Cyber War, she lays out all the reasons why hacking, stealing, weaponizing information was so impactful. And it will be again. And we will have to hope that not only candidates, but the press and the public will be able quickly to discredit what is being presented. And we won't face the horrible kinds of outcomes we saw before, where people believed Pizzagate, including a young man who drove all the way from North Carolina to Washington with his automatic weapon to shoot up the pizza parlor. Number 3, phony, false online news stories often migrate to the so-called mainstream media. And with the increase in sophisticated technology, that will become even easier and more pervasive. What a candidate says in one speech can and will be spliced together with something the candidate said in another speech and put out in a way that means something entirely different than what was intended or actually said. These are the so-called deep fakes. Remember what happened to Nancy Pelosi a few months ago? Somebody spliced words from different presentations, put them together, and presented them as though it were real. And think how hard it was to convince the major tech platforms who admitted it was fake to take it down. Some did, but many did not. And their answer, in particular Facebook's answer, was, well, we're going to let people decide for themselves. How can you decide for yourself when what is presented is blatantly false and manufactured? And it's not only so-called news stories. Now This News put out a video yesterday featuring very smart and very disturbing analysis from Judd Legum on how Trump's propaganda efforts are ramping up heading into 2020. The Trump campaign is already spending hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on Facebook each week to spread fake endorsements and outright lies about Democrats. They have been doing this since after the 2017 inauguration, but it's getting at an even higher velocity now. And even though these posts violate Facebook's stated terms of service, they're still up. Facebook is still paid for them. And the people who are targeted to receive them still believe them. Number 4 is the lack of security in our election system itself. Consider the fact that the Trump administration even finally had to admit that the Russians actually were in 2 counties' election systems in Florida. We actually know it's more, but they won't admit that. Representative Stephanie Murphy did an incredible statement the other day saying, I have been briefed, along with my Republican colleagues, about what actually happened in Florida, but I am prohibited from telling you. Think about that. A direct assault by a foreign adversary on a state's election system, and citizens of that state and our country can't know about it, can't know the details. How are we to protect ourselves? Now, we know, therefore, that's only the bare minimum of what actually happened. We don't know the specifics of everything, but as the Mueller report, still a very good source of information, despite the disinformation campaign against it, as the Mueller report concluded, the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in a sweeping and systematic fashion. I don't think sweeping and systematic describes 2 counties in Florida. A lot of states and localities, even if they were so inclined and technically capable, are not prepared to defend themselves against present and future interference. Again, even officials in this administration, one of whom is no longer there, the former Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, made it very clear the Russians are in our systems today.